The Pope is going on a road trip. To talk about this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, Pope Francis is headed to Iraq March 5th through the 8th. Do we know the purpose of the papal visit?
Yeah, this is an unusual visit. Those around the Pope say he hasn't left, obviously, the Vatican in over a year because of COVID, and now he is gung ho about leaving and where to? Iraq. This would be the first papal visit to Iraq, and those who are following this say that it is to, reunite the presence of Christians in the Middle East with the current narrative, and it's extremely important because in the backdrop of everything going on, obviously there's a lot of insurgencies. There's ISIS, there's Al Qaeda, there's the Iranian regime, there's Saudi Arabia fighting the Iranian regime. There's all these proxy wars going on the ground, but in the backdrop of all of this, we forget that the Christian population was once a very important, integral part of these societies in all of these countries, particularly in Iraq, where there was maybe 10% of the population was Christian, and now you have hardly 1%. Obviously, they have left, they have fled because of ISIS, because of the wars going on there for so many years. But this should at least be a symbolic reminder that the Middle East is made up of just more than just Shiite Muslims or Sunni Muslims. There were Jews there, there's Zoroastrians there, there's Baha'is, Christians, Catholics, so many different denominations, and this should be, at least, if only on the symbolic level, a trip that represents unity among all.
Now, let me ask you something. Any concerns about the Pope's safety going to Iraq?
Right, absolutely. And I think that's very much underscored in a lot of these reports that he's been told maybe this isn't the best time to go. And he said, you know what, I'm willing to risk it. Obviously, with not just COVID, but security risks. There was just an attack in the Green Zone in Iraq on U.S. Assets. So we know that it's not a safe place. So pandemic aside, it's not the best time to fly regardless. But pandemic aside, it's also a lot of uncertainty on the ground there, and we wish him well in all of his travels.
Iran has apparently rejected an offer of direct U.S. nuclear talks. Iran rejected the European Union offer to arrange direct talks with U.S. senior diplomats. Now, Lisa, the U.S. is still open to Iran nuclear talks despite Iran's rejection.
Sounds like a desperate girlfriend waiting by the phone. Yes, the U.S. has been rejected, but still open to talks. If you follow this report, last week the United States said, look, we are more than open to sitting down to talks with the Iranian regime, along with our European counterparts, the original P5+1 that entered the JCPOA, which is the Iran nuclear deal in 2015. We are ready to go back at it. And the Iranian regime flat out said, nope, we're not going to come unless sanctions are removed. Now, this is a game of chicken between the United States and Iran's regime to see who's going to blink first. The United States is asking Iran to go back to the stipulations of the 2015 deal, meaning they have to limit their enrichment of uranium. They have to stop their acquisition of weapons. And in addition, they should stop a lot of their other bad activities, meaning putting money into terror and supporting these terror entities, and obviously the human rights abuses back at home. But none of that is being spoken about. We are waiting to see what the Iranian regime does. But for now, they have rejected all offers and still waiting by the phone for President Biden.
Government officials in Israel say Iran was behind a blast on an Israeli-owned cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman. Now, there were reports of Israeli attacks in Syria, I believe in Damascus, in retaliation.
Yeah, so a lot of tit for tat. Now, Iran's regime, if you remember, has still threatened to retaliate for the killing of the shadowy commander, General Qasem Soleimani. So that's still on their tab. Add to that the killing of the nuclear scientist, I don't even want to call him a scientist, the nuclear butcher, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. So that's two big figures that were taken out by U.S./Israeli forces. And why do I say /Israeli? Whatever happens with the U.S., Iran will always assume that the Israelis were their counterpart, were their helpers in the Middle East to carry out the plan on the ground. So they blame both the U.S. and Israel for these two major assassinations, and therefore they are threatening retaliation. Now, this ship there's two holes on the side of the ship. There were two gunshots that were bored in the side of this boat. This was a clandestine spy ship, so totally undercover, wouldn't have been noticed. So they believe that the Revolutionary Guard was behind this. Of course, this morning, Iran's regime is denying all of that. So there's a lot of back and forth, as you said, a lot of tit for tat. Israel is going at it against Iran's assets in Syria, and Iran is going after Israeli assets in the sea. So a lot of proxy war going on. Nothing too escalated yet.
Former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says many Saudis want normalization with Israel. But Lisa, let me ask you something. What do Israelis want?
Yeah, this is an interesting time period because if we rewind back to the Abraham Accords, we had a long list of enthusiastic, moderate Arab nations signing on to a peace/economic deal with Israel, meaning they're looking at the future and saying, look, we don't want bygones to be bygones. We're looking at the future. We want your technology. We want your water irrigation technology. We want your hospital machinery. We want tourism. We want to move forward, and we're going to do it with you. And Israel is extremely enthusiastic. This was, of course, brokered by the Trump White House and Jared Kushner, his son-in-law. And now, after Trump has left office, and I should say right before he left office, he said that there are still a handful of countries that are enthusiastic to get into this deal. So the question remains, what will happen under a Biden White House? Will we still have these countries sign on to the Abraham Accords? And the biggest country that is in question is Saudi Arabia. Now, the backstory of all of this is to say that these moderate Arab nations that have already signed on to the Abraham Accords wouldn't have been able to do so without the blessing of the biggest power, the Arab power in the Middle East, and that is Saudi Arabia. So, of course, now that we hear that they are ready to sign on, well, it makes sense that they are. But what will happen now? We know that the Biden administration wants to cozy up to Iran, meaning it's going to do an about face from the Arab nations, from Israel, from Saudi Arabia. But the Middle East has a new order. It has a future to look forward to. So this is an extremely exciting time for the Middle East, for their futures, and we'll see how the Iran deal will fit into all of this.
Could we finally see peace in the Middle East? Wouldn't that be something? Now, let's bring things a little closer to home for just a moment here, Lisa. At a recent Republican Party rally, former U.S. President Donald Trump says he will not launch a third federal party, despite the rumors, but instead he says conservatives really need to unite.
Yes, and he's the man to make that message and for people to listen. Look, this was at the CPAC conference that took place in Orlando this year. Obviously, couldn't take place in Washington, D.C. It was an extremely important moment. And look at all of the support that President Trump has, especially around this conference. There was a straw poll where President Trump won by a landslide. There was a statue of President Trump there. And obviously, President Trump is extremely popular with this crowd. They were waiting for him to speak. This is the first public speech that he has made since leaving office. And the media reports, I should say the mainstream media reports, were waiting for him to announce that he's going to run for office in 2024, and he did not do that. And I think it was a very prudent move for him to come out and say, look, my work is done, but I'm going to serve as the figure to tell you guys that we have to unite. If we divide, we're going to be even more divided than ever before. We're going to give the left what it wants. We're going to give the media what it wants. So let's unite, all of us. And it's very big of him to say. This is exactly the kind of messaging that we needed when he was in office, and now that he's out of office, perhaps he could serve as a uniting figure for the Republicans.
Now, some are asking if Trump is actually finished with politics altogether, but he said his journey is far from over. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so regardless of whether he's going to be the front man or the guy who plays behind the scenes, he has a very important voice. He did not say that he's going to run for office. He said he's not going to divide by forming a third party. But again, regardless of what he decides to do, his voice will be very important. If he decides to stay in media, if he decides to stay in consulting, if he decides to just put his power behind any other candidate, that will be enough to take that candidate to the presidency. We have to remember, Hal, President Trump Trump came very close to winning that election. I know some people will write to me now because of this segment and say, well, he won. Yes, many people believe that there was fraud and they allegedly took the election. Let's just say that he came extremely close, even by the measures of the left and the mainstream media. In a pandemic year and in a very tumultuous economy, he came very close. So just imagine what his power, what his message, what his voice could do if he decides to put it behind another candidate that could be more uniting. So regardless, I think he's right. It's far from over. I think he's going to play a very important role, regardless of whether he decides to run or not.
Lisa, as a Myanmar court filed more charges against its ousted leader, police in that country fired tear gas and stun grenades to disperse hundreds of protesters in the main city of Yangon on Monday. Now, reports say police then later combed through the side street, firing rubber bullets at even more people.
Yes, the casualties are rising every week when you and I speak. This is getting bloodier and bloodier. Look, the military forces are becoming more bold in their position to keep that leader in prison, to double down on her sentence, and to keep things as is. And the protesters are doubling down on their position to free that leader. That she was elected fair and square. That this is not the future that they want. And unfortunately, in the interim, things are getting quite bloody. They're taking to the streets. The internet is intermittently cut out, so their stories are not getting out there, and they're not able to organize as well as they'd like to organize. But despite the fact they're not staying off the streets, they're not obeying the martial law that has been in place, and they have a long way to go.
Let's talk about this pandemic aid relief bill that the Biden administration has sent off to the Senate now, over $1 trillion. What's the feel you're getting on the streets right now with a lot of Americans? Do they feel this is really enough to help with vaccinations, to help financially with a lot of struggling American businesses, a lot of American families?
Yes, well, if you've been following the news here in the United States over the last week or so, people are very disillusioned about how things are going, what they were promised versus what they're getting, and how we're going to come out of this mess, this pandemic, economically, in terms of vaccines, in terms of our health, in terms of our future, all of it. So we obviously were promised one thing, the bill sat on the table, nothing was done about it. We had a strike in Syria against Iran's assets there. People thought that was a distraction from getting things done and putting the American people first. And now with this bill on the table, I think a lot of people are again very skeptical of where things are going. There's no plan as was promised. Look, politics as usual, right? How with Trump's presidency, a lot of people, they wanted transparency. If you loved Trump, you claimed that he was transparent. If you hated Trump, you said that we want transparency, we want him out of office, so we want Biden. Regardless, we're living in a post-political world where people want the truth. They don't want politics. They don't want a podium president. And when they're promised a certain thing and they don't get it, it's only been about 40 days that this Biden administration has been in office. But if they're not getting what they want and things are going the other way, well, then they're going to start questioning things, and they're going to start questioning them very quickly. And that's exactly what's going on here. The political environment is skeptical. That's the best word I can use. So people are waiting for their checks. They're waiting for their vaccines. They want a vaccine schedule. They want some deadlines, and they don't want to hear, Dr. Fauci coming onto the podium and saying we're going to have to be wearing masks until, the end of next year. So it's extremely frustrating, and people are asking for a lot of answers. So the next few weeks will be very important to getting Americans answers, if nothing more.
Yeah, it was interesting. America's top doc, Anthony Fauci, was talking about Americans, wearing masks till the end of 2022. That's incredible. Now, one of our producers, Nav, was reminding me the gas is outrageously expensive where you are in Southern California. I think you're paying over, $4 a gallon? You translate that to Canadian dollars, like $1.30, more than that a liter. What's going on? And are people blaming Biden?
Yes, they are, and it's no surprise. Obviously, you have legislative moves like the cancellation of the Keystone Pipeline and his position on no fracking, and you have so much going on where people haven't been traveling, but I think a lot of eyes are on at least local trips. Trips that are 2 or 3 hours away from home for the spring, for the summer. Families that can no longer afford to make those trips, or that they're going to be extremely expensive to make those kinds of trips. So gas is extremely expensive here. We are actually the most expensive location in the United States, the East Coast, parts of the East Coast. I grew up in New Jersey, where gas is the cheapest in the country. It's the port that comes in, and California being the most expensive. But nonetheless, it shows a trend in the price of gas and the supply and demand equation here, and it's not fun. No.
Wow. Stay safe, stay home, and stay healthy, Lisa. Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thank you, Lisa.
My pleasure.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks for watching.